Welcome to Power to the Patients, a LinkedIn Live and podcast series hosted by Power, where clinical research leaders across sponsors, sites, CROs, and patient advocacy groups discuss patient centricity in clinical trials. We explore the bottlenecks in today's system, challenge the status quo, and talk about future opportunities for innovation. Let's dive in.
We've had just such a great time talking about the future of patient recruitment and how we want to make things more accessible for patients today. But maybe I actually hand the mic over to you to give a quick introduction to yourself and your journey, and we can kind of jump off from there.
Thanks, Brendan. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. So a little intro about myself. I started as a clinical research coordinator at Northwell Hospital in New York City, which is where I'm originally from. Then I moved over to cancer research, where I worked at NYU's Cancer Center. And then I moved across the country to work at Stanford's Cancer Center as a senior research coordinator, working primarily in breast and ovarian cancer. And then in 2016, I got the opportunity to work for Genentech. And I've been working with Genentech from 2016 up until August of this year, so almost 7 years, where I was a clinical operations leader working across phase 1 to phase 3 oncology, primarily trials. And I also worked in ophthalmology as well. And just recently started as a senior clinical trial manager at a very small startup in La Jolla, Equilium Bio, where we're doing inflammatory diseases. So it's been an incredible journey so far, and love this opportunity to kind of sit and talk with you and dive deep into patient centricity and kind of the challenges around recruitment and better understanding with Power what this team does and how it's going to significantly improve this opportunity.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so maybe we start from the patient. You've seen everything from working directly with the patients as a research coordinator through to the kind of program management level overview. Everybody talks about everybody talks about the fact that patient recruitment is broken and so difficult today. Based on what you've seen firsthand, I'm kind of curious if you could maybe just highlight what you think is really going on in the industry and why it is such a struggle.
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, I think the root cause is from day one, the site selection. What hospitals are you selecting? From what I understand, really about 5% of hospitals available in the US are running about 70% to 90% of clinical trials currently. So there's a huge gap of other patients that don't have access to those hospitals. And I think that right there of study startup and site selection, that right there is one of the main root causes. I think the second situation that we're having in terms of challenging is the access to treatment for these patients in regards to the education portion. Are they even aware that these trials are happening? How are they reaching this information? How is this information being fed to them? Are the primary physicians aware of these trials? Are their communities aware of these trials? Is it on social media? There's a lot of different aspects that have opportunities to improve in regards to just education and awareness around the patient and around the trials that are available.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me actually just push a little bit on that. So 5% of maybe hospitals, around 70% of research. Is it what's the ceiling on the on the percentage of let's call them providers that could feasibly do research, do you think?
I think, again, going to the root cause, when doctors are in med school, they're not really taught about clinical trials or what that looks like at all. I think they only have one class, and it's very broad, high level about clinical trials. So that when you become a physician, you start treating patients, regardless of what specialty you're in, it's very rare that they actually go into the clinical trial space. And I think that right there is one of the root causes. So because of that, we have very limited physicians who decide to become investigators and work in clinical trials. Or when they decide to work in clinical trials, sometimes they don't have a great experience because they're overburdened, they don't have the right support staff around them, and the regulatory intricacies get very complex, and it does become a burden on them in terms of their time and resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So presumably, there's more doctors out there that could do research, but there's some ceiling, right, on like who has the infrastructure to do it, who has the background and interest to do it. It's not
Mhm.
like we're ever going to be in a world where 90% of physicians are actively doing research, right?
Right,
Um,
right.
so that kind of leads us to the next part, which is like access. So if 5% of physicians are doing research and 95% aren't, like all of their patients are for all intents and purposes like shut out from the trial system.
Mhm.
Um, Kind of curious, like talk to me a little bit about how do you think about like cracking that problem, because that seems like the majority of the potential patients out there.
Oh, absolutely. I think it goes back to education and awareness. So not only educating the patients of what trials are available, but we really need to provide more resources of education and training to the physicians at hospitals of what trials are available. At one
Mm,
hospital, you may have maybe only 10 physicians doing clinical trials, but the other 90% of those physicians, are they aware of the clinical trials happening? Are they informing the patients that just got diagnosed with, say, stage 2 breast cancer? Oh, there's X, Y, and Z clinical trials available. Are those conversations happening? I don't really think so. I haven't seen it. It's very rare. And if they do, it's more, oh, I think there's some sort of trial happening. Get in touch with this person, right? And then it
mm,
falls on the patient to make that phone call, to do that reach out, and better understand what availabilities they have to these treatments.
yeah. What like how does that happen today? Tell us a little bit more like about this like informal like exchange of like not like knowledge. Like, how does it work?
Yeah, it's a pretty complex process from a patient perspective. So, for example, you're going to a regular hospital, right? You feel a lump in your breast. Let's just go with that. And you go get a mammogram. You get your results. They say, okay, it looks a little suspicious. Your primary physician now refers you to an oncologist. Your
Mhm.
oncologist says, okay, let's go take a biopsy, right? Now we have to schedule that biopsy. Now that takes maybe another 3 to 6 weeks for you to get the results of that biopsy back. Now you're really just trying to understand from a patient, well, what's going on? The pathologist then informs the oncologist, okay, we realize stage 2 breast cancer, triple negative, for example, right? Now your oncologist says, well, these are the list of standard of care treatments we can do. We can do chemo, we can do radiation, we can do surgery possibly. Is the conversation of clinical trials happening? Not necessarily, not unless you went to maybe a top tier hospital where they have these clinical trials happening right then and there. If you're at one of those top tier hospitals, for example, Stanford, they would say, you're diagnosed stage 2 breast cancer, triple negative. These are the clinical trials available. Would you be interested in learning more? We can screen you. We can move forward and see what treatments we have available. But at another hospital, you don't necessarily have that, right? They're just going to throw you into the standard of care treatment, and that's going to be pretty much it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we first got connected because you were kind enough to kind of take a look at our platform, and you had a vision for how it could evolve some of these dynamics. We'd love to hear you talk a little bit about like how you like what got you excited about it, and like how you were seeing our platform plugging into the broader ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. So I don't know anyone who hasn't been affected by someone in their family or a friend who hasn't been affected by cancer. And so for me, it was one of my family members. And being able to understand that specific type of cancer and what trials were available was very convoluted. It was very complex. When you go to clinicaltrials.gov, it's not necessarily user friendly and it doesn't give you all the up to date information. It doesn't really give you the information you want as a patient or a family member trying to access that trial. So when I saw with Power's website, the platform, the friendliness, just the graphs and the colors and all of that. And I know you had a post recently about how that wasn't a mistake, right? Everything was very meticulously planned. It was like the answer to everything I was looking for from a patient perspective, right? Or a family member of look how easy it is to now understand if I select from that drop down menu lung cancer, breast cancer, whatever it may be, all of the trials now that are happening across the country are available to see. And not only that, there's contact information. Now you can see if you're eligible, if you're screened and somebody then reaches out. It's like a one stop shop. for a patient and a family member to really understand what treatments are available. And that, I think that was a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. What else would you like us to do? Right? Like where else should we be going with this as a somebody who knows far more about this stuff than I do?
I mean, I would love to see more hospitals involved and signing
Mm,
up with Power. I'm sure behind the scenes, you guys are heavily working on making that happen, and not not just like in major cities. I would love to see it in lower socioeconomic cities as well throughout the country where they don't
sure.
really have the abilities to travel across state and make that commute all the way just to get treatment. I really would love to see us integrate deeper into middle cities and across the country so that everyone really has the same access to treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Shifting gears a little bit, you run trials now.
Yeah.
And as a part of running trials, you're thinking about patient recruitment. One of the things that we're thinking a lot about is what is the future of patient recruitment? What does modern patient recruitment mean? And I'm kind of curious. Like maybe you just riff on that for a little bit. Like when I say modern patient recruitment, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. It's a very hot topic. What is modern patient recruitment? And I honestly feel like marketing agencies need to get involved for this because there's a lot of pressure on the sponsor companies or the CRO companies to come up with recruitment strategies. But at the end of the day, you are marketing a trial. And in order to
Mm,
do that, you need to have the appropriate fundamentals of understanding what that means because a leaflet, a newsletter, a poster, it's very old school. That doesn't necessarily be effective that we want it to be, right? We need to be on social media. We need to be on Instagram, Facebook, etc., advertising saying if you have this disease, sign up, see if you're eligible, right? Like have that visibility, and we need to go digital. Just as an example, we were behind on patient recruitment. The CRO said, well, the hospital wants to have a budget to put it on social media. We're very close to missing our deadline.
mhm.
Within 1 week of posting on social media, we got 7 patients. That's
Mm,
like unheard of in 1 week. So the power of social media is there. It just needs to be used effectively. And I think we're still kind of learning the ropes of that and need to understand who to partner with, what's out there, who's working on this behind the scenes to really target this. I think
yeah,
that's super huge for really changing the game of patient recruitment.
yeah, yeah. Maybe like you know, walk me through a little bit. Like what are the core components of a patient recruitment strategy that or a modern patient recruitment strategy that you look for now?
Yeah, you know, it really depends on the therapeutic area and the stage of it, right? If you're working oncology versus inflammatory diseases, the inclusion criteria is going to be very different. But in terms of what I'm looking for something new, something fresh. I don't want to hear about posters and newsletters and phone calls, right? I want to understand how are you identifying the patient population? What are your strategies to now target this patient population? And not only that, you can target them, but what is your patient follow up? Most
Mhm.
patients, I think it was like 80% of patients, if they don't get a call back or within 24 hours, they're no longer interested. You have to immediately be able to gauge those patients, bring them in, screen them, and understand. And instead of screening them for one trial, let's screen them for multiple trials of their disease and see which one they're actually eligible for. The inclusion exclusion criteria are very strict. There's usually no flexibility when it comes to these because it's mandated by the protocol. So if you're able to screen them for, say, 5, 6 trials at once, at least there's a high probability they'll be eligible for one.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that we think about a lot as our platform, right?
Mhm.
Um, for a site to screen a patient against a couple different protocols, they're quite limited to the trials that they're running, right?
Yeah.
But for us as a platform, let's imagine there's a patient who shows up in LA, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of different trials happening across a lot of different locations in LA,
Mhm.
and we can act as this coordination layer that helps patients get to the right trial at the right place
Yes.
in a way um, that's value add, I think, for all the kind of stakeholders involved, for the patients, for the sites, and for the sponsors.
Mhm. No, absolutely. I think it also goes into like ownership and empowerment to the
Mm,
patient as well, to know that they're not necessarily reliant on the physician and that study team to give them these options. That now, with a platform like With Power, if they're aware of this platform, they've heard about it, they've seen it, they've somehow been involved, that they can now take that initiative and say, you know what, X, Y, and Z heard they have cancer. Let me see what I can do to help them, right? It becomes very community based. It becomes very empowering for them to know what the options are, what hospitals are running it, what's
sure.
the closest location. So just the convenience of that and just having that access at your fingertips, I think it's a game changer.
Sure, absolutely. What what has gotten you the most excited recently in terms of like new strategies, new approaches, as you're thinking about patient recruitment strategies that you're kind of pulling together now?
Um, I think the fact that more like databases, because everything goes into the database right after every patient visit, you have to enter the database. That study teams have more resources to understand the schedule of assessments. These schedule of assessments are very
Mm,
complex, and there's a lot of
mm,
different requirements per visit. Like you'll have to take a blood sample, you'll have to take an MRI scan. There's all these different things that have to happen that don't necessarily happen. So some databases now create an app that are specific to your protocol and your scheduled assessments. So from a study team, right, from a study
mm.
coordinator PI perspective, they pull up that app. This patient came in for visit 23. They can now see what exactly is needed at this visit. They can see the future visit, what's going to happen, and inform the patient accordingly. Like, okay, this visit was only about 30 minutes. The next visit's going to be a little more comprehensive. Plan to be here for about 2 hours, right? So
Yeah.
setting those expectations and sharing that with the patient. But I think there could be more improvement on sharing the progress of the trial with the patient as well. A lot
Fascinating.
of times we're not necessarily checking in with the patient. And I think
Mm,
sometimes we lose focus of that, right? We're very big on transparent communication with the study team, but the study teams are usually overburdened. They don't necessarily have the time and energy to now relay that communication to every single patient. So
sure.
I think there could be more efforts done to be transparent with the patients as well, share the progress, share what's going on, are we close to enrollment, what's going on with the trial, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Help me see a little bit behind the curtain here. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of shiny new tools, right? As somebody who's making the decisions about um, how you piece together some of these components, how do you do it? How do you like think about putting the puzzle pieces together for each study, and then um, like what's going on in your mind as you're deciding these things?
Well, I would say patient journey is always number one priority.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there are challenges, right? Because you want to be able to use all these new shiny tools and resources, but there are restrictions. It depends on the hospitals that you select. Are they open to using these
Mm,
resources? Are their regulatory authorities approving these resources? And it's a very slow, drawn out process. And most of the time, it's easier for them to say no than to consider approving it, because that alone would take 6 months to a year just for them to go through their due diligence essentially that they have to do. So one thing that I would really love to see is for these shiny new tools and new companies coming out with, say, AI, coming out with these exciting opportunities. It doesn't necessarily fall on the sponsor. We only have so much say. We could say yes, absolutely. Now go convince the hospitals, right? Because
mm,
that's really what we need. We need them to be on board. As soon as they're on board, it's full speed ahead.
yeah, gotcha. Because ultimately, like if it can't be implemented, it doesn't matter how much you like it.
Exactly. If the study team is not on board, then there's nothing we can do.
Yeah. How do you think about the how do you think about budgeting for like experimental stuff like this versus things that like have to be a part of it? Like as you think about putting together budgets for studies, like what kind of goes into that?
I think we could have a whole separate
I bet.
conversation around budgets.
Yeah.
Well, I'll try to give you high level. When it comes to budgets, really what determines that is the protocol and the schedule of assessments, and then breaking down every single visit, then understanding the time and effort that it has the impact on the site. and also on the patient. So most of the time, we will reimburse patients for their time and effort, for
Hmm.
their commute, for every
Sure.
single visit. So that way, it's not necessarily a burden on them, right? If they
Makes
need to
sense.
travel an hour for each visit, we're going to reimburse you for gas, mileage, taxi, etc. And then it comes down to the hospital. What overhead are they charging for their time and effort? What
Sure.
study coordinator, what PI, all of these have fees associated with it. And depending on your zip code of that hospital, if you have a hospital, say NYU, Manhattan, very high rates, they're going to have very high overhead because they need to charge accordingly. If you have a hospital in the Midwest, that overhead is going to be significantly less. So the
Sure.
cost per patient is going to be drastically different, but really the hospitals determine that.
Gotcha. Gotcha. And then what about as you think about like patient recruitment, right?
Mhm,
As like a set of activities that go into the budget. Like, how do
mhm,
you think about like the amount that feels appropriate to add on top of the pre-existing budget of a study? Like we've all seen the stats: 86% of trials are delayed, and the dollar
mhm.
per day is incredible, and the and this is a bird, but that has nothing to do with budgeting. Um, and then like 40% of like study costs end up becoming like root cause um due to patient recruitment. So like how do you think
Mhm.
about like what is like the incremental investment to be made like in recruitment?
So let's back up for a moment, right? When
Yeah.
you're doing site feasibility and you have this massive questionnaire that you're asking the hospital and the study team to respond to, one of the main questions is how many patients do you think as a PI you can recruit? They'll say maybe 4 to 6, they'll say maybe 10, right? They're always going to be over eager, which we appreciate. But
Yeah.
then we take that back and we look at our historical data. We say, okay,
Yeah.
well, we've worked with you before. We know you always shoot for the highest, but realistically, you really enroll about 50% of that. So if you're saying 10,
50%.
realistically, I'm going to say about 5, right?
Okay.
I would say 30 to 50% to be,
Gotcha. Okay.
to be a little
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
But most of the time, I would say almost 9 out of 10 times, it's lower than what they expected. And that's
Sure.
okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So then you kind of do the analysis and you say, okay, let's be conservative on the number of patients that like this site is
Mhm.
going to recruit.
Yeah.
Um, where do you make up the difference then to kind of hit your study goals? More sites.
Right. So say for example, we select 50 sites, right? And of the 50 sites, our goal is to hit 100 patient enrollment. So just easy math, it's going to be 2 patients per site, right? And we need to hit this goal in 1 year. Now we're at the 6 month mark. We only have about 50 patients. Say we only have 1 patient per hospital. So now what do? There's a lot of recruitment strategies from a sponsor and CRO level that you need to now go have those conversations with their site, see what's hindering your enrollment. You had said you're going to enroll 5 to 6 patients, maybe 10 patients. We've really only seen one. What's happening? And a lot of times we're going to get that feedback of maybe the inclusion exclusion criteria was too difficult. Maybe they're just not seeing that patient population anymore. Maybe the patients can't come into the site as much as the protocol requires. Sometimes it's once a week, twice a week. That's just too
Yeah.
much of a burden on patients.
Sure.
So there's a lot of during the study to understand by checking in with the site and having extra monitoring visits where you send the CRAs and you say, let's do a booster visit, right? Let's hop on a call with the PI and the study team. Let's talk about recruitment strategies, what's been done, what hasn't been done. Can we bring in an external consultant like 3Wire, for example, right, where they come in and now they're going to help boost. So there's a lot of different things we can do to mitigate, but it's all about keeping a pulse on these sites. And you're always going to have your high enrolling sites, and then you're going to have sites that just never enroll. And that's just the name of the game.
Yeah. And it sounds to me like uh, there aren't very many proactive measures at the beginning of the study besides choosing sites. Like what's behind this like proactive versus reactive like approach to kind of responding to what's going on versus like front running like some of the known challenges?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I would say being proactive would be really probing deeper when it comes to the feasibility and before selecting the site to understand do we have any historical context? What has been their performance? Are there any competing studies, right? If you have 10 breast cancer studies, then your study's probably not going to get as much attention. You're going to look at, okay, if we enroll this site, we open you up to activation, how often are we now checking in to make sure that you're meeting the recruitment goals? Usually it's X amount of patients per month. And if we're behind, then it's up to us and the CRAs to really touch base with the PI, touch base with the study team, see what's happening. And I think with all the moving parts that happen, it's difficult to always maintain that as your number one priority because you have everything else happening, right? When study enrollment is happening, it is like very fast, top speed, everyone going full blast. And it's hard to maintain that oversight, especially if you don't have all the resources and support. So we do rely heavily on the site to relay to us any communications or any feedback that they have. But I do think there's opportunities for us to improve that, to maintain open lines of communication and do better like touch bases and check in and see how we can help from the very beginning and not necessarily waiting 6 months later.
Gotcha. I want to do a callback to kind of wrap this up to something you said in the very beginning, which is it all starts with the patient journey.
Yep.
Like when you're trying to piece together this puzzle, it all starts with the patient journey. Talk to me a little bit about how you go about understanding the patient journey, and then what are some of the things you're listening for and the decisions that get made as a result.
Yeah, so I would say I understand the patient journey because I've worked at hospitals and I understand all the different departments and point of contacts in terms of different physicians that are involved in that patient journey. I think it is a very time consuming, convoluted process from getting diagnosed with cancer to maybe
Mm,
almost a year later before you're even
mm,
eligible for treatment or ready to do treatment, ready to make your next move, ready to move into a clinical trial. It's just a very drawn out, long process. And again, depending on what hospital you're at. So I would say, in terms of patient journey, again, I think it falls on the hospital to maybe shorten that process instead of making them go to this location, right, to go get surgery, and then this location to go get radiation, and this location to go get your labs. It is just like extremely time consuming. So I
sure.
think there is better efforts to streamline that and to also maintain that open communication between all those different departments. That I think would be a game changer as well. That would be a huge pivot in the entire infrastructure because these people don't necessarily talk to each other. They're not necessarily having those conversations about this one patient. And then the patient sometimes falls through the cracks. And I think that's what becomes very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We're seeing increasingly that patients have to advocate for themselves.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. How
Yeah.
how are you thinking about that as like on the sponsor side as somebody who runs trials?
Um, I mean, patient safety is always number one, and making sure that when it comes to follow up, I mean, for cancer trials, right, sometimes the follow up's like 15, 20 years because we really
Sure.
want
Yeah.
to make sure we're doing that follow up,
Yeah.
is keeping that lines of communication open with the patient. If they move, for example, that we make sure there's another hospital that will accept them and
Mm,
maintain that follow up as well. So there is very, very strict, high level oversight of these patients from beginning to end. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about clinical trials is once you're enrolled in one, it's very hard to fall through the cracks. Versus if you
mm,
go in regular standard of care, you don't have those eyes on you. You don't have people, you don't have a whole
sure.
team
Yeah.
your journey and making sure you're good.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, Sadaf, this has been such an incredible conversation. Is there anything else that's top of mind that we didn't get a chance to talk about that you really want to put on the table and kind of put out there?
I would say we can make it really simple. And I really think it comes back to education and awareness of
Mm,
clinical trials for patients, and not just in major cities, but in the smaller cities as well. And if that could be a comprehensive effort from all stakeholders, I think we could really change the game. Only about 5% of patients enroll in clinical trials. So there's a
yeah.
huge opportunity here.
Absolutely. And, there's all of these incredible stats that are out there, which is, I don't know, 70, 80% of patients never hear about a clinical trial at all or in the first place. But once they learn about it, like 60, 70% of them are willing to consider or willing to participate once they've learned a little bit more. Education and awareness, massive part of the problem. And unfortunately, we're just bottlenecked because we're relying entirely on our existing sites to do that education and awareness work. Whereas people are trying to learn elsewhere. They're trying to learn on the internet. They're trying to learn by themselves in their communities with friends and family members. So there's just so much work to be done here to get the word out for folks who could really benefit.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks again for taking the time. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about it today, but congratulations on the new journey ahead. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Brandon. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already, please follow Power on LinkedIn, sign up for our live events, and engage with us in the conversation. We hope to have you join us next time on Power to the Patients. Take care.